Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. My name is Nick Marro with Occupy Fantasy. As always, I'm here to help you break down tonight's MLB DFS main slate on both DraftKings and FanDuel. If you haven't already, please like the video. Also, subscribe to the channel. That lets us know that you would like more free content like this. Additionally, if you're not a member of Occupy Fantasy, check the links in the description below. As a member, you get access to the model you'll see me using throughout the video. Also, a single lineup builder, multi lineup builder. We have a private Discord server full of DFS pros to help you improve your game. And for MLB, we have the daily plug article, of which I'm a contributor, where we will highlight our favorite arms, bats, and stacks for every main slate. You could also find me on Twitter at Nick Marro DFS. But without further ado, we got to get into this one. First time this season, I think we have a 15 game main slate, which is ridiculous. I know we got an inside joke in the Discord about me trying to keep these videos to a half hour. That's going to be especially difficult today. I am going to do my best, though. 15 games to get through. A lot of good spots for pitching, a lot of good spots for hitting. As always, I got a notepad file up. I'm going to keep my favorite pitchers in stacks in here. And then at the end, we can kind of recap everything. But yeah, I want to get into this one. Not going to spend as much time digging into stats as I usually do today, just because there's so many games to get through. I got Max Muncy pulled up here. This is his DK player page, but yeah, I love him on both sites. Obviously, not the batting average you want to see out of him, but he's coming off the IL today. It sounds like he should be activated, and the Dodgers are going to be in cores against Connor Siebold, who probably shouldn't be a major league pitcher. Their team total in Vegas is pushing 8 runs. I know in the model we have them over 8 runs. Very clearly the top stack on the board, but we'll get to that game. We're going to go in order by start time. So yeah, let's get into this here. Usually, when you're in the model, you got to select which slate, but every single team is on the main slate today, so you don't even need to select DK main or FanDuel main. They should all be included there. But yeah, let's get into it. First game on the board here, we have Yu Darvish and the San Diego Padres taking on Rich Hill and the Pittsburgh Pirates. So jumping over to the pitcher page, let's have a look here. Yeah, so sorting by OF index, Darvish just outside the top 10, which on a 15 game slate is actually really solid. I don't mind him here. Then on the other side of things, we have Rich Hill, who is very cheap, especially on DK, where he's only 6,300. But I don't know how you can trust him in a spot like this against the Padres, just given all the options we have. On these massive slates, you should like everything you're playing for the most part. um, there's going to be low owned options that are quality at both pitcher and stack. So you probably don't want to be forcing anything you don't really like here. But yeah, Darvish around a 26% K rate on the season. This Pirates offense obviously has some pop, but around a 23% K rate. So we're seeing his price at 8,100 on DK, 9,300 over on FanDuel. I'm going to go ahead and write Darvish down as a viable option. But yeah, I really don't have interest in Pittsburgh bats. I just think, I mean, Darvish is solid enough. Even if he's not on his A game, I don't know that Pittsburgh is going to be able to climb up a 15 game slate and be one of the top stacks. On the other side of things, though, I do think we have to take a look at some of these Padres. We have them floating around the top five, ranking fifth in OF Index, fifth in Team ISO, fourth in Team MOBA, third in Team Total. So I don't think we can do this with every stack like we like to that we're honing in on, but I will click over to the Padres on the batters page and just show you guys which bats are popping towards the top. Rich Hill, obviously a lefty, so no surprise that the right-handed bats are going to be favored, but there are a few guys with reverse splits here. Jake Cronenworth's done a good job hitting lefties this season, so we're going to see Bogarts. This is not sorted by OF index. That's why Cronenworth's at the top. I don't mind Cronenworth, but yeah, he's at the bottom for a reason. He's been good against lefties. You're getting him at no ownership, but he is not a priority. Don't get that twisted. We really like Tatis here, Machado, Gary Sanchez, who's certainly boomer bust, but he's hit a lot of home runs at a pretty low price tag this season. But yeah, first Rich Hill. We're gonna like the Padres, and we gotta favor the right-handed hitters. So no surprise there. Really like Tatis, Machado, Sanchez. Sanchez pretty affordable on both sides. Hae-Sung Kim as well, former KBO star. Don't mind him. Nelson Cruz, Andrew Bogarts, and yeah, I mean you're gonna get Soto super low owned in the lefty versus lefty matchup. But at the same time, I mean this whole stack's pretty low owned. Again, this is a 15 game slate. A lot of places to look, so you don't have to try too hard to get different. Moving into the next game on the board, we have Andrew Abbott and the Cincinnati Reds taking on Tyler Wells and the Baltimore Orioles. So Abbott's been one of the better young pitchers in baseball. The Orioles have been hitting the ball extremely well this season, so this is one of those situations where I think it's kind of a wash. I will say Abbott does have enough upside to justify that DK price tag, especially. Not crazy about paying 10-2 for him over on FanDuel. But yeah, I mean, looking at his numbers, 24% K rate, holding opposing hitters to a sub 250 WOBA. So Abbott's been really solid. I like him here. I will mention him in our summary at the end of the video, but I do think he's more of a DK play. First ball, DK only. As a price thing. And yeah, I mean, if you want to play him on FanDuel, you're going to get him around 1% owned, but at the same time, there's just a lot of really good pitchers in that price range and even cheaper today. So I don't know that we need to prioritize them, but I will say I do respect Abbott's game enough not to want to get to Orioles bats. As for Tyler Wells on the other side, I mean, kind of a similar situation, around a 27% K rate this season. Obviously, this Reds offense has been much better since they called up guys like Cruz and McLean. Joey Votto coming off the IL as well should boost them a bit here. But yeah, for me, I don't mind Wells. I think he's cheap enough on both sides to consider, but it's tough for me to call him a priority in a very difficult matchup against these Reds. I don't really want to get to Reds bats here. Just taking a look at the stack model, I can see Baltimore or Cincinnati anywhere close to the top, but at the same time, I do respect this offense enough not to want to rush to Wells, but he has been excellent. He has been striking out a lot of guys. Surprisingly high K rate for him, around 26%. And I mean, we look at the swing strike rate too, that's pushing 12% as well. So I do think these are true numbers that we're going to see continue for Wells throughout the season. I mean, this is a great offensive team who needs solid starting pitching, and Wells has been one of the bright spots in that rotation. So don't mind Wells here. Not going to call him a priority, especially in favorable hitting conditions in Baltimore. This is one of the few games where it looks like there is significant rain in the forecast, so keep an eye on it. I do think it goes, but definitely worth keeping an eye on. So moving into the next game on the board, we have Ryan Walker and the San Francisco Giants taking on Kevin Gausman and the Toronto Blue Jays. I'm just taking a quick look at Walker's game logs. I mean, he's an opener. This is probably going to give way to a bullpen game for the Giants. On a smaller slate, I'd probably have some interest in Blue Jays bats. But in a situation like this, where they're able to kind of play the matchups, if a lefty comes up, they could put in a lefty, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that we can really prioritize Blue Jays bats here. At the same time, I have zero interest in Walker. He's really not an upside arm by any stretch. On the other side of things, though, we do have Kevin Gausman, who does look really good here. Obviously, the Giants' offense isn't terrible, but at the same time, it's really not one we have to fear necessarily, especially against right-handed pitching. They show a 25% K rate against righties this season. Kevin Gausman, 31% strikeout rate against opposing hitters has been extremely solid. But we look at the ownership, he's very popular. And like I said, this is a 15 game slate. So I do like Kevin Gausman here. I do think he's a solid play versus the Giants, but at the same time, if he's going to be super high owned compared to a lot of the other options in the same price range, I don't know that we need to call him a priority. He's kind of more of a cash play as things stand, but at the same time, I do think he has enough upside to warrant a look in tournaments. If you're playing a lower owned stack, he's going to make more sense than he would if you're playing some chalky bats. Moving into the next game on the board, we have Julio Teheran and the Milwaukee Brewers taking on David Peterson and the New York Mets. Teheran has been kind of frustrating this season in that no one really saw this coming out of him. Just refreshing one of my just that just got froze up. But yeah, speaking on Tehran, so yeah, coming into the season, everyone was like, okay, wow, he's still in the league. Pretty surprised. Didn't really expect much out of him, but he's done an excellent job limiting damage. Not a very high K rate, but we keep trying to stack against him, and the regression just hasn't really shown itself yet. I mean, we're still dealing with small sample sizes, but only a 17% K rate, so he's not really the type of arm we're ever looking to roster in DFS, but at the same time, he's holding opposing hitters to a 250 WOBA, 120 ISO, so he's done a really good job limiting damage. I do imagine we see the Mets relatively high in the model. Yeah, they're kind of in the middle, two in team MOBA, so they are probably going to make some good contact here. Eighth in team total, they are top 10 in team total, but yeah, not ranking all that highly in OF index or ISO rating. So the upside isn't really there against Julio. I mean, the regression is coming for him, and if you can kind of land on that. Uh, you're probably going to be able to climb a leaderboard. But for me today, I don't know that the Mets are the spot where I'm going to try to do it. I'll probably just avoid both sides of this one. Don't have much interest in Tehran because he doesn't have the K upside. Don't have much interest in Mets bats just because Tehran has been a lot better than expected. On the other side of this one, we have David Peterson. And yeah, I mean, the Brewers' offense against lefties has not been good at all this season. 25% K rate. I mean, they do have some pop at 150 ISO, but very low 304 WOBA. So yeah, I do not imagine we're going to see Milwaukee popping towards the top either. Yep, just outside the top 10 there. So this is another situation. I don't really have any interest in Peterson, but I'm not going to call the Rock. Excuse me. I'm not going to call the Brewers a priority either. It is a 15-game slate, like I said. You really want to hone in on what you actually like here. And I don't know that either side of this game is worth calling a priority. Moving into the next game on the board, we have the Miami Marlins with Sandy Alcantara on the mound taking on Garrett Whitlock and the Boston Red Sox. So pretty high implied totals here. Sandy, obviously coming off that Cy Young season in the NL, has been mostly terrible. We do not see him near the top. He is very cheap. If he were to suddenly get right, if you could get a 7,900 Sandy Alcantara to hit a ceiling game, obviously that's going to be a great play. But I mean, we have not really seen that out of him recently. 19% K rate on the season. Even if he's limiting damage, he's just really not getting the strikeouts you need to climb up a leaderboard. This Red Sox offense only strikes out around 21% of the time against right-handed pitching. So really no interest in Sandy here. I might have some interest in Red Sox bats though. They're really not profiling all that well. Again, I mean, we're dealing with sample sizes that stretch into last season where Sandy was a Cy Young pitcher. But for me personally, I wouldn't mind getting some Red Sox bats here as a means to be contrarian. If it was a smaller slate, I'd probably call them a priority. But on a 15 gamer, I don't know that we necessarily need to do so. Um, but yeah, I guess I'll jot them down as like, I don't know, GPP only versus Sandy Alcantara. But then on the other side of things, we're looking at Garrett Whitlock. Where is he? Yeah, so kind of middle of the road, actually ranking higher than Sandy Alcantara, 21% K rate, or pushing it at least, but he is allowing a 193 ISO to opposing hitters. So he's allowing a lot of power, which obviously is not a good thing. The thing is, this lineup isn't all that dangerous. So, well, I really don't have a ton of interest in Whitlock here. I also don't have a ton of interest in these Marlins bats. I mean, obviously, Luis Arias at the top of this order is hitting around 400, so that's notable. If you want to use someone like Jorge Soler as a one-off, he's fine. Jesus Sanchez. There's a few cheap bats in the middle of that order that I don't mind. And I will also say Jazz Chisholm should be activated off the IL today, so that's something to keep an eye on if you do have interest in stacking Marlins. But for me, this is another one of those games where I respect the pitcher enough not to want to stack against him, but I really don't have much interest in the pitcher in the matchups because he kind of lacks K upside, and it is a little bit dangerous. Moving into the next game here, we have Joe Ryan and the Minnesota Twins taking on Bryce Elder and the Atlanta Braves. So Joe Ryan's been mostly excellent this season. Pretty sure he had a bad start last time out. But yeah, he's just outside that top 10. He's very expensive here. That's the issue. There's a lot of good pitchers that are cheaper than him. So while I do respect Ryan and his 27% K rate, I just don't have much interest in playing him against the Braves. If we click over to the stack model, this is probably the lowest we've seen Atlanta in a while. Part of that is the matchup. Part of that is that it's a 15-game slate. So I don't know that we need to prioritize them here. But whenever you could get a team this talented with this much upside at very low ownership, there's at least some merit to considering them. On a smaller slate, though, I would have much more interest and I'd spend more time digging into Braves. But personally, on a 15-gamer, I don't know that that's necessary. For the Braves, we have Bryce Elder on the bump here. Taking a look, where is he? Yeah, just outside the top 10, actually priced pretty favorably, all things considered. But the issue with him, while he has done a good job limiting damage, not a very high K rate, but this Twins lineup does strike out a ton. They're showing around a 27% K rate against right-handed pitching. So, while I'm not crazy about him, he's kind of a borderline priority for me. I don't mind Elder versus the Twins. But yeah, definitely GPP high risk only. So no interest in the bats really from this game. If the Braves put up 10 runs, no one will be surprised though. So if you want to consider them against Ryan as a super low on play, I don't think it's crazy. It's just a 15 game slate. I think you can kind of make more straightforward calls and still get them at low ownership. Definitely keep your eye on the ownership percentages for both the arms and the stacks throughout the day. Moving into the next game here, we have Framber Valdez and the Astros taking on Jordan Montgomery and the Cardinals. Battle of two lefties here. Valdez has done a really good job this season. 27% K rate, holding opposing hitters to just a 100 ISO. He's actually been pretty good against righties, which is a little bit surprising. The power he's giving up is to left-handed hitters. He's not going to see many of those here against St. Louis, but historically the Cardinals have crushed left-handed pitching. So I don't know that I'm rushing to get to Valdez, but at the same time they have been pretty disappointing. But just a 21.7% K rate against lefties. Obviously, they do have a lot of power. Bats like Arenado, Contreras, Goldschmidt in the middle of that order. Tommy Edman leading off as well. Just all guys with big power against left-handed pitching. But at the same time, we're getting Valdez very low owned, only 5% on DK, 2% on FanDuel. So in high risk contest, I do like Framber Valdez. I think he's worth considering. But it is a tough matchup against the Cardinals for sure. Again, historically, they do hit lefties very well. High risk only versus St. Louis. But then on the other side of things, we're looking at a Jordan Montgomery who only has a 21.8% K rate this season. And the Astros, while they're not the Cardinals against lefties, they have been pretty decent. Um, they are ranking seventh in terms of OF index, eighth in team ISO, so they're kind of up there. Jordan Montgomery has been pretty inconsistent, a 183 ISO allowed to opposing righties. So yeah, I do think the Astros are at least worth considering in large field tournaments. Astros versus Montgomery, obviously favor the right-handed hitters. But yeah, not going to call them a top priority. I'm going to put some spaces in between them and a few of the other stacks. We're going to get to some chalky stacks very soon, though. But for me personally, I don't mind playing the Astros in a decent spot on the road here at very low ownership. They do have upside against an Armin Montgomery who has been extremely inconsistent. But yeah, coming off a really nice start, but before that, a few shaky outings. So I don't know. I'm not going to call the Astros a priority. They're kind of borderline, but I would rather play them than I would Montgomery here. Moving into the next game on the slate, we have the Detroit Tigers with Matt Manning on the mound taking on Martin Perez and the Texas Rangers. So Manning, I believe he's been out injured for much of this season, so we're dealing with very small sample sizes here. But the small sample sizes we're dealing with are very, very, very poor. So I would expect we see the Rangers at least are floating around the top 10, and there they are, second highest team total on the board here. I do like Rangers bats. Um, and yeah, we're actually going to favor the lefties, which is a good thing against, excuse me, Matt Manning, who's been worse against left-handed hitters. We got guys like Seager, Nate Lowe, John Heim, who is a switch hitter, Robbie Grossman, another switch hitter, and Tavares at the bottom of that order. So there's a lot of good lefty power here. You could also look to guys like Garcia or Marcus Simeon. But yeah, Matt Manning, I'd probably spend a little more time digging into what he was doing in his rehab outings, seeing what kind of shape he's in right now. But I mean, just looking at his numbers on the season, he's been absolutely terrible. Near 380 WOBA allowed to both sides, 500 ISO, just 16 plate appearances. So that is going to come down, but there is a ton of upside here for Rangers bats. And yeah, they're pretty low on 32% aggregate on DK, 21 over on FanDuel. Compared to some of the other stacks, I think that is reasonable. Second highest team total. I think as we get this lineup to come out and they probably feature an extra lefty or two, we do see the Rangers climb into that top 10. So that is a stack I'm considering. I have zero interest in Matt Manning today. As for Tiger bats, Martin Perez can be frustrating to stack against. He hasn't been very good this season, though. 178 ISO allowed to righties on a 15 game slate. I don't know that we need to rush to Detroit Tigers here, but they do have some power in the middle of this order, especially from the right side. Torkelson, Ibanez, Baez. If you want to get a cheap stack in there, maybe pay up twice a pitcher on DK, something like that. I don't think it's crazy to go to the Tigers here. Excuse me, it's just tough for me to really call them a priority just given how many good stacks we have on the slate. On a smaller slate, I have much more interest. But if you're looking to get different, you're looking for something cheap. I don't think Detroit is insane by any stretch, but it's just tough for me to call them a priority again. Outside of those few power bats in the middle of the order, just not a great offense really on paper. Moving into the next game on the board, we have Ranger Suarez and the Philadelphia Phillies taking on Jameson Tyone and the Chicago Cubs. So we're still waiting for some data on this one. As most of you know, the weather in Chicago, the wind rather, definitely affects that park more than any other park in the major leagues. If it's blowing in, it's a massive, massive bump to pitchers. If it's blowing out, it's a massive, massive bump to hitters. So Suarez has actually been really good lately. We see him kind of floating around the top 10 there. 7K over on DK, 9K over on FanDuel. The Cubs obviously have some power, but they're fairly inconsistent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write Suarez down, but I'm going to say keep an eye on the wind in Wrigley. If it's blowing in hard right now, it looks like it's going to be blowing about 10 miles per hour in, which would be a big boost to Suarez. And I think we'd see like lower than a 4 run team total for the Cubs here if that's the case. But if that switches and it's blowing out, I'd probably get away from Suarez again. This is a massive slate. Um, and then, yeah, I kind of feel the same way about Phillies bats. I'm not going to have much interest in Jamison Tyon here, regardless of where the wind's going. But if the wind is blowing out, then I would like the Phillies. Tyon usually struggles against left-handed hitters. We have guys like Schwarber, Harper, who else in this order here? Bryson Stott. A lot of good lefty power. So I do like the Phillies here. Verse Tyon, but only if the wind is blowing out. So definitely keep an eye on that situation. The wind matters in Wrigley more than any other park in baseball. Moving into the next game on the slate now, we have Gavin Williams and the Cleveland Guardians taking on Brady Singer and the Kansas City Royals. So Williams, a very talented young arm. He's been pretty good, but at the same time, not quite as good as we were expecting. I mean, this is a guy who was touted as having a very high K rate, only a 17% K rate so far at the major league level. 7% swinging strike rate is what's more alarming to me. So trying to find him in the model here. Oh, there he is. Gavin Williams, very cheap, 5,900 over on DK, 8,200 over on FanDuel. I mean, we're dealing with such small samples that maybe those K numbers start to climb. But for me personally, I mean, I don't know. 4 innings, 4 earned, 4 Ks last time out. Just not a spot I'm necessarily rushing to get to on such a massive slate. At the same time, I don't have much interest in Royals bats. I do respect Williams as a pitcher. He is very cheap with some upside though, but I don't know that I want to go there and make that type of gamble on a 15 game slate. So for me, not that interested in Royals bats. I do respect Williams, but not really rushing to play Williams even at a very cheap price against a decent Royals offense just because we haven't really seen the K upside out of him yet. And we have so many options today. On the other side of things, we're looking at Guardians bats against Brady Singer. I mean, Singer really hasn't been good this season. Cleveland, excuse me, popping just outside the top 10 in a lot of these statistical categories. But yeah, I do think they have upside against Singer. 216 ISO allowed to opposing hitters, 231 two lefties. So Josh Naylor looks excellent here. Jose Ramirez, the switch hitter, looks outstanding. Don't mind Stephen Kwan, Josh Bell, Andres Jimenez, even Brennan at the bottom of the order. They're not popping as highly in the model as maybe I'd hope or expected, but I do like them here. Singer has been one of the more volatile arms in baseball. So they're kind of boomer bust, high risk, but I do favor the left-handed hitters. So that's another spot we could take a look at for bats. Moving into the chalk of all chalk, we have the Dodgers taking on the Rockies in Coors. Clayton Kershaw on the mound for Los Angeles, but then Connor Siebold on the mound for the Rockies. So Siebold has not been very good. He allowed 9 earned runs in his last start. Let me just pull up some of these numbers here because he has been terrible. So first, yeah, 219 ISO allowed to opposing hitters, 370 WOBA, just a 16% K rate, not missing any bats, 8% swinging strike rate, and it's actually pushing 9, but it's still terrible. And even on a 15 game slate, we have the Dodgers right now sweeping the stack category. So we got 71.5 OF index rating, which is almost 20 full, or it is 20 full points higher than the second best stack on the board here, which is Colorado, who we'll talk about in a minute. But they're leading in ISO, over a 200 team ISO, 350 team WOBA, 8.4 implied team total. So the Dodgers are as good as it gets today. They are going to be extremely popular though. So let me talk about how we can get a little different. Um, but yeah, I like the lefties, I like the righties. But we're going to have to mix in some of these lower owned bats. So let me click over to the stack page. Really can't spend this much time on just one team given we are digging through 15 teams. But yeah, Max Muncy, I put him on the cover. I had him pulled up at the start of the video. He's coming off the IL. I'm hoping that keeps his ownership down, but he's a little bit cheaper than he should be, in my opinion, on both sides. 5,200 over on DK, 7,500 over on FanDuel. I do think we see that ownership climb throughout the day. I think there's sites out there that aren't projecting him in the starting lineup. We see that we are. It's already been said. Dave Roberts has said that he should be activated today, so he's going to be in there. But keep an eye on the ownership. Whoever you can get at single digits, that's going to be how you're going to get different with these stacks. So guys like James Outman, even Peralta, Jason Hayward, very low owned on both sites. He's going to help lower the price of things here. So I'd prioritize Muncy, Martinez, Freeman, Betts where you can, but at the same time, you do not want to play the four most popular Dodgers probably in your stacks. You're going to be competing against other Dodger stacks. So yeah, I mean, if you do want to play the chalk and you do want to go with the biggest bats like Betts, Freeman, Martinez, Muncy, something like that on FanDuel, you're gonna have to just get different with your pitching, which is actually very, very easy to do today. So just say quickly, we click over to the pitchers. I would not be playing anyone in double digits. So if you're stacking Dodgers, it's gonna be tough anyway because they're expensive. But Gausman, Otani, really not in consideration. I am shocked to see how popular Zach, David Peterson is. Obviously, the Brewers have been making every starter look good, but I really don't have much interest in him. But I mean, there are other ways to get different. We'll talk about Brian Wu a little later. Valdez, obviously, no one wants to play lefties against St. Louis. If you could afford him, he's fine. Kopech in a risky matchup against the Angels. There's a lot of low-owned arms. So if you are playing Dodgers bats, just make sure you're getting different at pitcher or mixing in some of the lower owned guys throughout the order, and the model will update throughout the day. But the Dodgers are by far the best stack on the slate, arguably the best stack we've seen this year given the team total here. So really, 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 really like the Dodgers. Connor Siebold has been mostly terrible, but just make sure you're getting different in larger field contests and cash games. You can just jam as many Dodgers as you can fit, but at the same time, I mean, it's really tough to deny their upside even on a 15 game slate. I mean, there are other spots you can go. I know there's some people who would just say just fade them because they're so chalky, but it's rare we see a team pop in the stack model 20 points higher than everything else. So for me personally, I am going to get the Dodgers tonight. I'm just going to look for ways to get different with the rest of my lineup, which should be very easy to do given the 15 game nature of the slate. On the other side of this one, we have Clayton Kershaw, really not popping all that highly. He's pretty expensive here, but he's been solid, pushing 29% K rate on the season, limiting opposing hitters to a 287 WOBA. But the Rockies, like the Dodgers, are getting a big bat back tonight. The Dodgers getting Muncy back. The Rockies are getting CJ Cron back tonight, who's one of their best power hitters against lefties. So while I don't necessarily agree with the fact that the Rockies are second in the model, I mean they do have enough upside to maybe consider here. It's enough for me to mostly stay off Kershaw, which really shouldn't come as a surprise on a 15 gamer. But definitely favor right-handed hitters versus Kershaw if you do go to the Rockies. But I do expect them to kind of fall in the model a bit. I'd be a bit surprised if they were still second in OF index rating by the end of the day. But this is a high risk only play regardless. So if you want to go to Rockies, Grichuk, Diaz, Crone, Tover, all have really good power against lefties. Even Montero, Montes can make contact as well here pretty easily. But Kershaw, historically, he hasn't been terrible in Coors, and it is a divisional game, so he is very familiar with that ballpark. He usually does a decent job kind of navigating through this order. We do actually have pretty big sample sizes on that as well. So I do expect we see the Rockies fall a little bit in the model here. But again, it is Coors Field. It is a lefty. They are getting Crone back, so there are reasons to like this team as well. But just to kind of recap, love, love, love the Dodgers. Just make sure you're getting different elsewhere if you do go to them here. Moving into the next game on the slate, we have Shohei Ohtani and the Los Angeles Angels hosting Michael Kopech and the Chicago White Sox. So Ohtani has been mostly excellent, coming off another solid start. Nice matchup here against the White Sox. 33 or 32, pushing 33% K rate on the season, holding opposing hitters to a 281 WOBA. Swing strike rate north of 13%, which is obviously excellent to see. The issue, though, is just the ownership. He is very pricey. He is very expensive on both sites. So Otani in a vacuum, probably my favorite pitcher on the slate, but at the same time, he is going to be very popular. So just make sure you're getting different with the rest of your lineup if that is where you decide to go. On the other side of things, we have Michael Kopech. Once a very highly regarded prospect, does seem to be rounding into form this season, but it's been a little bit of a bumpy road. He still has a 27% K rate, but he's allowing a lot of power to righties and lefties. So taking a look here, he's just outside the top 10 in the model, but you're getting him sub 5% owned and affordable on both sites, 8,800 on DK. 8,700 over on FanDuel. So in high risk contests, I don't mind Kopech. If you're looking for a low owned arm to play with your Dodger stacks or something like that, I do think he's fine here. But he is very, very risky. Obviously, the Angels have solid upside in this spot. So, yeah, and we're seeing them popping in the model as well. Fourth in OF index, sixth in team ISO, 25th in WOBA, ninth in team total. So, second category is not so hot, but yeah, that fourth in OF index rating, sixth in team ISO, certainly very appealing. Um, so yeah, definitely get to some Angels here. But at the same time, like I said, I do respect Kopech as a pitcher, and I would consider them high risk. And if this is where I'm going, he's actually had reverse splits this year. I mean, Otani is essentially matchup proof, but guys like Drury, Trout, Hunter Renfroe, I think they're all solid options. So if you want to go to Angels, feel free. This is one of the rare matchups on the board on a 15 game slate where I actually do like both sides. I do like Kopech. Obviously, like some Angel bats as well, but obviously don't play them in the same lineup, especially on a 15 game slate. That should be kind of go without saying. But moving into the next game on the slate here, we have Taj Bradley and the Tampa Bay Rays taking on Zach Gallen and the Arizona Diamondbacks. We see Gallen popping right around the top five in the model here. We have a very talented arm in Taj Bradley just outside the top 10. Just a brutal, brutal matchup for Bradley against these Diamondbacks. They've been outstanding, but he's coming off back-to-back starts where he recorded 8 strikeouts. So just clicking over to some stats here. Bradley, 34.5% K rate on the season, very solid 12.6% swinging strike rate. But the issue is the Diamondbacks only strike out around 19.8% of the time against right handed pitching. 173 ISO, 340 WOBA. It wouldn't even shock me to see them in the model pretty high, up just outside the top 10. But this is more of a situation where I respect the arm enough not to want to get to the D-backs bats, but I also respect the stack enough to not to want to get a Bradley where he's north of 9K on both sites. So kind of a wash right there in that one. Then we're looking at another similar situation. We have Gallon 9,900 on DK, 10K over on FanDuel, getting some ownership, 26% K rate on the season. He's done a pretty good job limiting damage, holding opposing hitters to a 111 ISO, 275 WOBA, pushing a 13% swing strike rate, but obviously a very, very difficult matchup against the Rays here. The Rays have some upside. I don't mind them. I think I'd rather go to Gallon just because I don't know. I think it's harder to find arms than it is stacks on the slate, but at the same time, really, this is one of those situations that's kind of a wash. So I like Allen, but don't know that I'm rushing to play him against the Rays. I do think he's fine in high risk, large field contests. Let me just jot him down. ARZ, high risk versus TB. And then Rays bats, they have some upside, but on a 15 game slate, I don't know that we necessarily need to get to them there. Moving into the next game on the board, just a couple left. We have Johnny Brito and the Yankees taking on Paul Blackburn and the Oakland Athletics. So Brito, pretty frustrating last time out, was terrible in AAA, got the call up, looked outstanding. I mean, there are occasionally guys that just don't really lock in when they're in the minors. Then when they get the call up, suddenly they look great again. So there is some upside for Brito here at 6,400, 76 over on FanDuel against the Athletics. But at the same time, it's a 15 game slate. I don't think we need to get that cute, for lack of a better word. Oakland, not really a stack I have much interest in. The Yankees actually have one of the best bullpens in baseball. If Brito struggles, I could just hand the ball off to them, which is going to limit the upside of an Athletic stack. But yeah, at the same time, just not much interest there. On the other side of things, I mean, Paul Blackburn, really not a great arm, but he is frustrating to stack against just because he does do a good job keeping the ball in the park for the most part. Pretty high WOBA allowed, 340, pretty low ISO, 150, which isn't great, but at the same time, I'm really not rushing to play this Yankees offense right now. They've been pretty inconsistent. I mean, there are a few bats in here. Harrison Bader's back. He looks okay. Rizzo. But at the same time, it's really tough for me to call them a priority. They are ranking relatively highly against Blackburn. But for me personally, and I am a Yankees fan, I'm just really not all that interested in them here. But if you're playing the late slate or something like that, there is some merit to considering them. So this game's mostly a wash. Don't really want either pitcher. If there was anything, it would maybe be the Yankees bats, but I'm really just not rushing to them either. Last game here, we have Jake Irvin in the Washington Nationals taking on Brian Wu and the Seattle Mariners. Clicking over to the pitcher model, we see Wu floating around the top 10. Very, very, very talented young arm. We're seeing a lot of ownership going to him over on DK, where he's only 6,900. Washington doesn't usually provide a lot of K upside, but for me personally, Wu is actually one of my favorite value plays on the board tonight. Just pretty high floor here against Washington. Limited K upside, but too cheap. Sorry, just jotting this down. So I prefer him in high risk contests, but I do like him a lot here. Zero interest for me in these national bats. On the other side of things, though, Jake Irvin has been mostly terrible. No issue getting to some Seattle. They do strike out a lot, but that doesn't necessarily hurt you in DFS. So it wouldn't shock me to see them climb the model throughout the day. But on a 15 game slate, just tough for me to really call them a priority. All right, so we made it through. Let's get through the summary real quick here. So the pitching options I wrote down that I'm considering is Otani up first and foremost against Chicago. Love him here, but he's going to be extremely popular. So if you're playing a popular Otani, make sure you're playing lower owned stacks. We got Gausman against San Francisco, similar situation. I like him, not quite as much as Otani, but he's similarly owned. So if you do go to him, you're going to have to get a little bit lower owned with your stacks. Darvish against Pitt, some risk, but I like him. Wu here for Seattle, probably my favorite value option. Kind of limited K upside against the Nationals team that doesn't strike out a ton against righties, but he is very cheap on both sides and reasonably owned. He's getting some ownership, but I think he should be a bit higher owned than he is. So I really, really do like Wu here. Michael Kopech against the Angels, super high risk, but he's shown that high ceiling. Similar story for Abbott, TK only. He's overpriced on FanDuel, I think north of 10K. Don't want to get to him there. Elder for Atlanta, I think we have some regression coming for him. We haven't seen it yet though, but he does have upside against the Twins. High risk play only. Same for Framber Valdez against St. Louis, and then we got to keep an eye on Ranger Suarez. That Phillies situation in Chicago tonight. If the wind is blowing in Wrigley, I would get to some Suarez. If it's blowing out, maybe just skip him. Again, it is a 15 game slate. Zach Allen obviously has upside here against Tampa Bay, but Tampa Bay, very, very tough matchup. So getting into the stacks now, I'll click over to them so we have the rankings in the background, but I really like the Dodgers. Obviously, they're going to be super chalk though, so just make sure you're mixing in some lower owned bats, getting different with your pitchers if that's where you decide to go. Um, Rangers taking on Manning, who I think is coming off the IL. I want to spend a little bit more time digging into that, but definitely favor the lefties against him. We got righties for the Padres against Rich Hill. You could probably still play Soto, though. He's pretty much matchup proof. Sandy Alcantara, kind of fooling the model right now. I think we're still pulling some stats from last season, and he's been pretty terrible, so I wouldn't mind getting to some Boston. I said I like Kopech, but at the same time, he's risky. If he fails here, the Angels' bats could really go off. And then the Phillies, if the wind's blowing out in Wrigley, I would like them here against Tyon, but definitely keep an eye on the weather there. Guardians, boom bust for Singer, definitely high risk, but favor the left-handed hitters. Naylor, Jose Ramirez stand out. Then the Rockies, I don't have a ton of interest against Clayton Kershaw, but with CJ Cron back in the lineup, they do have enough righty power to at least consider. And then we have the Astros against Montgomery, who hasn't been very good lately. Definitely favor the right-handed hitters in that one. So once again, my name is Nick Marro. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Marro DFS. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check the links in the description below to sign up to Occupy Fantasy today. Let's have some fun tonight, everyone, and make some money. Take care and good luck.